Attendees are in listen-only mode.
Good afternoon and welcome to our August SugarCRM user group. My name is Deneen Ponarelli and I'm the Marketing Manager for Technology Advisors. With me today are our two SugarCRM experts, Megan Sheehan and Justin Kielfau. I always mess up your name, Justin. I hope that was close enough. So today's event, unlike a webinar, is a little bit more open and flexible to discussion, where we hope you feel free to raise your hand, ask questions, speak up about your curiosities having to do with Process Author. Everyone is on mute, so if you have a question, please type it into the chat box and our experts will respond throughout. There will be a point during the discussion today also when we'll ask you to vote on something, and that'll make more sense when you see it. You'll use the chat box for that as well. So we'll have you vote 1 for one thing, 2 for the other thing, and so if you just want to type it in there, that would be great. So with that said, let's get started.
So our agenda for today, we're going to start with a quick recap from our Chicago Sugar Workshop, which Justin will do in just a second, and then I will be talking to you about Process Author, also called Advanced Workflow. We'll also talk to you about new releases, and then, as Deneen said, any questions you have throughout or at the end, we'll be happy to try to answer those for you.
Thank you, Megan. As Megan mentioned, we had a Chicago Sugar Workshop. It was held at the Park Ridge Country Club in Park Ridge, Illinois. It's a suburb of Chicago. We had about 20 people attend, a mix of customers and prospects. And the roadmap, or the agenda, was pretty straightforward. Sugar was kind enough to send out someone to present the roadmap. It was a very in-depth roadmap. The presentation took about 45 minutes, so we saw a lot of the technical side of the roadmap as well as kind of some of the upfront, non-technical, where they're going roadmap, so that was really interesting. I did a short 20-minute presentation on the true potential of sugar. I started out by doing out-of-the-box functionality with configurations using dashlets, reporting, Studio, Module Builder, and kind of built that into customizations using logic hooks, schedulers, custom dashlets, and then we built on top of that to show some third-party products, and even had 2 other co-sponsors, Viable and Acton, do presentations. We had an Ask the Experts panel with myself, Megan, Sam Biardo, our CEO, and Brandon Contreras from Acton. And finally, we had a keynote from Mike Santoro, the president of Walker Sands here in Chicago. It's a PR and marketing firm for people in the tech space. It was really interesting. If you want to hear more about that, you can listen to the last episode of our podcast, Show 15, at SugarCRMtalk.com. Megan?
All right. So what we're going to focus on today in this user group is Process Author. You will hear me talk about Process Author and Advanced Workflow. Sugar has bounced back and forth on the names of it so many times that I've lost track at this point. I'm not sure which is technically the correct name. So Process Author or Advanced Workflow, you will hear both used kind of interchangeably at this point. This is a newer feature within Sugar. It was introduced in version 7.6 about a year and a half ago. And it's only available in Sugar Enterprise and Ultimate. So if you have Sugar Professional, unfortunately, this is not a feature that you have available to you. Eventually, Sugar's previous workflow tool, which they're now calling Legacy Workflow, the one that's on the administrator page in Workflow Management, will be removed from the product, and this will be the only workflow tool available once that happens. So what we wanted to do today was kind of give you a bit more detail around how Process Author works and walk through a few examples of some workflow processes built in Process Author. This is a slide I shamelessly stole from Sugar, as you can tell from their logo, but it's a nice diagram of the 4 different modules that are involved in Process Author. So kind of on the upper left here, we have, actually I'm going to start in the middle. Process definitions is really the heart of how Process Author works. That's where you define the steps and the components of your process. So that's kind of like your workflow definition from the old legacy workflow tool. Some processes may use process email templates. Those are pretty self-explanatory. Those are any email messages you want to send out as part of your process. Some processes may also use process business rules. We'll look at an example of this, but process business rules are basically a set of conditions and results that you want to use within a process. So the most common example, and what we'll look at it for, is lead routing. You want to take a list of territories and assign them into territory teams or specific people, and you may need to use that set of rules in multiple processes. You can set up one business rule and use that across multiple process definitions so that when a territory changes, you just have to update a rule, and that will cascade down to all of the processes using that rule. Now, those three modules, the process definitions, the process business rules, and the process email templates, are all available only to Sugar administrators. That's why you see them with that red background in this diagram. Processes can be exposed to and require action from Sugar users. And so that's why you see kind of the bottom portion of this diagram saying front-end users may see running processes. And that will depend on how the process is configured and whether it requires user input. And we'll look at examples of that as well. So I'm going to go ahead and jump right into some examples. And we're going to start with something super simple and then build up in complexity from there. The first example is a process that we use internally. So this is actually built in our internal Sugar instance. And what we're doing with this process is we're sending out an email notification. So let me go ahead and bring up Sugar. And in particular, this email notification is sent when someone purchases a new annual Starfish license. So that's something we actually monitor outside of our Sugar. If you purchase Starfish ETL to do, for example, an integration to Sugar, we track your license within our Sugar instance. And so when you add a new annual license, you can see the settings on this. This process is going to start for new records only when the license type is equal to annual. And then what it's going to do is it's going to send an email to Meg, who's in charge of Starfish sales, or well, not strictly speaking true, but close enough for this purpose. And so within that, what I have set up as my settings are which email template I'm going to use and who to send that message to. And this particular process, like I said, is very simple. That's it. All it's going to do is send an email to Meg, and that's the end of the process. And so the only other piece that's part of this is, of course, the email template. These are pretty self-explanatory, a pretty typical email template builder here. You can insert variables for where you want to insert data from Sugar. So in this particular case, we're going to say who's the license for, when does it expire, and have a link to the account record. Okay, so the next process we're going to look at, and again, I'll pull this up in Sugar in a second here, but this one is clearly a lot more complicated. This is a quote approval process. And we're going to walk through the details here, but a couple of reasons I chose this as an example to show you. The first one is that it really shows off the branching capabilities of Process Author. So this is something that you definitely could not do with the legacy workflow tool. You could not have a condition that evaluates to decide what to do next within the process. And that's one of the, I think, strengths and really powerful aspects of Process Author is the ability to do that. The other thing we're going to see that's going to show off a little bit more of what Process Author can do is one of those user activities. So within this process, we are actually going to prompt a user within Sugar to approve or reject a quote discount. So let's go ahead and see how that works. First, we'll look at the process definition. So here it is in all its glory. This one is going to start when a new quote is created. And again, we could right-click on this and see the start conditions here. This one is really simple. It's just any new quote is created, so there's no criteria. Just every time a new quote is created, we're going to look at the discount amount. And if I right-click on that one, we're going to see it has settings to determine where to go next. And so if the discount is less than $10,000, the sales manager step is going to come next. If the discount is more than $10,000, greater than or equal to, I should say, it's going to go to the VP of Sales instead. And so we can see those are the next two activities within our process here. Either the sales manager or the VP of Sales is going to get the next step. Now, these are each configured as what they call user activities. And so this is, again, where your Sugar users can actually get involved here. And there's two different activity types. There's an approval rejection type, which is what this one is using, or there's a routing type where we want someone to assign something to the correct person, but they need to look at it first and decide who that person is. So with an approve or reject process, what we're doing here is figuring out who to assign this to, as well as how quickly does this person need to respond. Looks like we're just giving him as much time as he needs. And are there certain fields when he's looking at this quote to approve or reject it, are there things he should be required to fill out? And or are there things that he should not be able to change, that should be read-only when he's doing this approval? So they're giving you a lot of flexibility in terms of what do you want that process to look like when he gets that approval activity. Then obviously either he's going to approve it or he's going to reject it. So we need to tell the process, assuming we'll do different things for each of those, we're going to have another gateway, another branching point here, where either he's going to approve this process or he's going to reject it, and then we're going to do certain things in that situation. And so what they've decided to do here is they're changing the stage of the quote and then sending an email. So either changing the stage to approved and sending an approval email, or changing the stage back to negotiation and sending a rejection email. And we actually have essentially the same options here. If the other person approves it or rejects it, it's either going to get changed appropriately and then send the appropriate email. And then that's the end of the process. So at this point, the quote has either been approved or rejected, and the sales rep is going to know whether their quote was approved or rejected or not.
Question for you. How are users notified when their approval is required? Also, what happens if they don't respond in the required time?
Yeah, great question. So let me switch views here. So this is what the user would see. This is one of the users who might be assigned those approval processes. And so that user is going to use this processes dashlet on their homepage, and they're going to have to monitor that to see when they have new processes waiting for them. And so in this case, Jim's got 10 processes waiting for him. He's been falling a little bit behind here. And so he would click on this approval process, and he's going to see then the quote with certain quote details, and he's going to approve or reject it. And so in this case, I'll just go ahead and approve that, and it's going to go ahead and finish off that process. So change the stage as appropriate, send the approval email, and it's going to take me back to my home page so I can move on to the next process that's waiting for me. If he doesn't do it in a certain amount of time, you can configure what to do. So I think this process didn't have an expiration, but what it did do is allow to just go straight to the end. If he doesn't approve it in a certain amount of time, at some point it's going to just move past this and go to the end of the process. You could also say if he doesn't approve it in a certain amount of time, pass it on to somebody else. Maybe that means he's unavailable right now and so is going to step in for him and do the approval. Okay, and I'm going to show you one more example, and then we're going to have an option and we'll build a process together. The third example we're going to look at is a lead assignment process, and I chose this particularly to show off the business rule capability. So this is what I referred to a little bit at the beginning as that third module for administrators, where you can build rules to categorize from one point of data to a second point of data, basically. And so what we're doing in this process, and again, I'll just bring it up in Sugar, it's easier to see here, is really we're doing two layers of lead assignment. The first one it's doing is a global assignment. And so there's a global territory assignment business rule that's being referred to here. And you can see that if we look at the settings, use the global rule. Now if I go look at that rule, what this rule is doing is translating the country into a region. And so in this organization, there's different sales teams for Europe, Asia Pacific, Latin America, and Canada and North America. And so we want to take, based on where that country is, we want to assign it to the correct region so that it gets to the correct sales team. And so when this process runs, when a new lead gets created, Sugar is going to check that rule, it's going to check the country, and it's going to assign it to the correct region. So it's going to get assigned to either Europe, Asia Pacific, Latin America, or the US. If it's Europe, Asia Pacific, or Latin America, those are as specific as the teams are in these regions. And so what we're going to do is do a round-robin assignment, meaning that we're just going to take turns passing leads to the next person on the list. If there's 5 people in Asia Pacific on my sales team, the first 5 leads, 1 will go to each of them. And when the 6th lead comes in, it'll go back to the first person on the list, and they'll get the 6th lead. If they're in the US, we have a few more US sales teams in this organization. And so what we want to do is then go ahead and check a second business rule, which I don't actually have open, but basically is translating the states into various regions like West, Northwest, Northeast, and then assign it to the correct team based off of that state. And again, we're going to round robin it among that team. So in this case, the US West team is going to get, people on that team will get assigned the leads that match to the West region. We've also put an option in here in case we can't find this person. Maybe the state isn't spelled correctly, or maybe the state wasn't filled out when this lead was created. So in that case, we can't properly geographically route this lead. And so we'll add a task for the supervisor to do that. If the lead does get assigned out, we're going to send an email notification, which again would have an email template associated to it. And then we're going to wait 2 days. This is another nice feature that's available in Process Author, is the ability to have wait periods. And so I can wait 2 days and then check to see if something is true before deciding what to do next. In this case, they've got a very short turnaround time for their sales team. After 2 days, they're expecting that lead to be converted. And if that lead is converted, then the process is over. If the lead is not converted, they're going to email the supervisor and do a rerouting task or activity, which again would show up on my home page in that list of processes for me, and assign that lead to somebody different. And then they're going to do the same thing. They're going to wait 2 days, check to see if it's converted. If it's still not converted, assign it to somebody different. All right. What I would like to do next, I think the easiest way to really dig into this a little bit more is to actually build a process with you. And so this is where the voting is going to come in. We decided not to get all fancy and try to set up a GoToMeeting poll or anything like that. So just use the chat window and type in option 1 or option 2. Which one would you like to see me build? Option 1 is we're going to build a process that will update the account type when an opportunity is won. Option 2 is that when an opportunity is won, we're going to email a manager specific to that type of sale. So it'll have a branch in it to determine who the correct person is to email. So we're going to give you a moment to get your votes in. And Deneen, I'm counting on you to tally up the votes and tell me which process I'm building.
So far, option 2 is in the lead.
Okay, so if you're leaning towards option 1, you better hurry up and get your vote in.
Speak now. Seems like most people want option 2.
Okay, option 2. So when an opportunity is won, we're going to email the manager specific to that type of sale. Okay. So in Sugar, the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to plan ahead a little bit. And if I'm going to send an email, I'm going to need an email template. So either from my home page or from the navigation bar, I would go to the Process Email Templates module and create a new Process Email Template. I'm going to call this the One Opportunity Alert. My target module is going to be opportunities because that's where I'm triggering this email from. It's from a one opportunity. And then I'll save and design this email, which will take me to the template builder. And in the template builder, I'll create a subject and body for the email. And I can insert details using the field selector, the little gear button here. So for example, I want to insert the opportunity name. I want to insert something from a related module like the account name that's still in the field selector, and I just go ahead and select which module I want to insert from. So I can switch to the accounts module and insert the account name. And then let's just say I want to share the amount of the opportunity. Okay, and then I probably want to say whose opportunity it was, so let's put the assigned to in here. And that, again, I believe is going to be a related module. Yes, so we can pick the assigned to user and find their name. I'll go ahead and do their first name and their last name. I can pick both at once. I'll probably want to put a space in between them, though, when I send my email out. I can also insert a link to the opportunity record in Sugar. Starting in 7.7, they made that much easier than it was in 7.6. You just click this little link button there. You pick what do you want to link to, the opportunity, the related accounts, the related user, etc. We just want the opportunity link in here, and it will insert that for me. And I can also put a field into the subject line. So if I want to put the opportunity name into the subject, I can do that as well. Same way, I just click the little gear button in the subject line to get into the field selector. Okay, and this may not be the best email ever, but I think it's good enough for our purposes here, so we're going to go ahead and save that. And now I need to go to the process definitions module, which again I can get to either from my navigation bar or from my home page, and create a process definition. And I'll give this a name. I'm going to build this in opportunities as my target module. And this is probably the #1 problem I run into myself when I'm building processes. I'm at this point where I want to hit myself over the head every time at this point, but processes by default are in disabled status so that they don't start triggering before you're done building them, which is a great thing. You don't want the process to start triggering when it's not going to do anything yet and start throwing errors. However, I have learned that I am very bad at remembering to go back and put it into enabled status before I start trying to test it myself. So I'm going to point that out now, and I hope that when I get to that stage of this webinar, of this demo, that I'll remember to go back and enable this process. But at least 50% of the time I go to test it and nothing happens, and I have to go back and say, oh yeah, you're an idiot, Megan. You need to enable the process. All right, so when I'm actually building my process, I have little icons up here for the different types of components I might want to add to my process. And I'm always going to start with my start event. What is going to trigger this workflow? Now, when you drag something out onto the canvas here, it's going to have just a generic name, and typically you want to rename it to something more meaningful so that when you're looking back at this process and monitoring how it's running, you can remember what that step was. So in this case, this is going to be a 1 opportunity. And then the other thing I'll have to do is right-click on that element and go into the settings for it to actually configure the details. With my start event, there are 2 details here that I need to worry about. The first is what type of records does this apply to? Is it new records only? Is it updated records only the first time it meets that criteria, or is it every time it meets that criteria? In this case, I only want to send the email the first time an opportunity is marked as 1. So I'm going to pick the updated records only option. And then the other thing I have to do is if I don't want to trigger this for every single opportunity, which I don't, I only want to trigger it for 1 opportunities, I need to set that as my criteria. And so I'm going to click into the criteria box, and it's got a criteria builder in here where I can use modules as well as user criteria. In this case, what I want to look at is the sales stage being equal to closed won. And I'm just going to submit to add that to my criteria. I don't need it for this particular process, but I'll just point out that you can do and, or, not, and parentheses as needed to do more complicated logic for that. All right. Once my opportunity is won, my kind of idea here for this process was I'm going to email somebody, but the person I'm emailing is going to vary depending on some sort of opportunity classification. And so I'm going to need a gateway step, a branch step, that I'll set up to say where to go next. And I'm going to grab that out here. Again, I'll probably name that what type of opportunity is this? And I'm just going to drag kind of from the edge of this to the next piece to get an arrow to connect them together. And you might have noticed the little red exclamation point on there that went away now. That's just an error warning that Sugar is warning me my process cannot possibly be done yet because not everything has a next step or an end. And if you're like me, you get a little finicky and you want them to line up pretty and you adjust them up and down until they're in a straight line. All right, before I can configure the details of this element to tell it where to go next, I need to set up what those next steps are because I have to put them in place before I can say go to this step in this condition or that step in another condition. And so what we're going to do here is we're going to send an email either way. So I'm going to find my send message option. And I'm going to email either Jim or Chris. And I'll go ahead and configure those first. So right-click on each of them and do my settings. I'm going to use that one opportunity alert template. The only, well, not the only one I have, just happened to be first. And in this case, I'm going to email to Jim. Now I can just type it in there and it's going to come up, here's Jim Brennan, so I can pick him from the list. If I was going to send it to multiple people, I would pick, multiple people in here. And you do have the option to CC or BCC recipients. And same thing for Chris. I'm going to pick my one opportunity alert template and send this email to Chris Oliver. All right. So then I'm going to connect the pieces together. Close enough. And now I can actually tell it when to take each branch. Now I have got a couple options on this. I can either give it explicit instructions for one versus the other, or I can set up a default option and then tell it when to take the other option. The default option is a little bit safer because that way it always has a way to go, even if for some reason my opportunity doesn't fit any of the criteria I established. So in this case, I think my default flow is going to be to email Jim, and I'll just tell it when I want to email Chris. And if I right-click again, I can go into the settings. And now it's going to ask me, okay, when should I email Chris? Now, if I hadn't had a default flow, it would have asked me when to email Jim and when to email Chris. I'd have two separate gateway criteria boxes here. In this case, what I'm going to do is use the opportunity type field, which is going to be a module evaluation. You can also have it look at a user response, like we saw with the quote approval or reject. That would have been a form response. You can have it look at a business rule, like the territory assignments. And you can also travel relationships. So I am going to use an opportunities field for this, but if I was going to do this based on account criteria, for example, certain industries, I could do that as well. I could say from the opportunity, look at the account and check the industry. But what I'll do here is I'm just going to say if the opportunity type is existing business, that's when I want to email Chris. In all other situations, I'm going to email Jim. And I'm going to save that. And now I just have to tell my process to end so that it knows it reached the end. Now, in this case, it doesn't really matter, but there's technically different types of ending. In case you were doing multiple branches at the same time, it does have the option to do parallel branches where it's actually doing 3 or 4 different things at the same time. And then you can tell it to just reach the end of that branch but let the others keep running. Or if you reach the end of this branch, go ahead and end the whole thing. And so if you're ever curious and wondering what's the difference between do nothing and terminate, end is just end this branch, terminate is end the whole thing. In this case, it really wouldn't actually make any difference because when I end that branch, there's nothing left to do. And I could either have 2 end conditions, one for each, or I can just join them back together at the end condition. It really doesn't matter. Either way, it's going to work. If I can get my arrow to come up here. Come on. There we go. All right. And then I'm going to click my Save button. I should see the save just gray out. It does auto-save as you're going as well. And I'm going to go ahead and activate my process or enable my process. So here is my process. I will enable that. And I didn't actually plan ahead to the fact that I was going to want to send an email here, so we're not actually going to get to see the email send, but that's okay. We can go see how you monitor processes that are running, which is actually more important anyways. And so I'm going to go ahead and win an opportunity here. change the sales stage to closed won. Save that. And then I'm going to go to the processes module. And within the processes module, there's an administrator-only view called process management. And this is where you can actually see the processes that have been run or that are currently running. So it looks like there was another process that ran that I triggered at the same time. But here's my one opportunity alert process, and I can see that this process is completed. And if I use the preview button over here, I can actually see what happened. So this opportunity was won. It checked the opportunity type, and that one must not have been existing business because it emailed Jim, and that was the end of the process. Now, there's also, for something that's maybe a longer running process, you can actually see a history with timestamps. When did it move from each step to the next step? And so if I were to look at something with a little bit more detail to it, like this quote approval process, again, I can see where is this. Let me open this up as a bigger picture just by clicking on it. So here, the quote was created, the discount amount was evaluated, the sales manager needs to approve it, and that hasn't happened yet. So it's stuck waiting in this stage for that activity to happen, just like we saw with the earlier on that, they didn't have any other step other than wait for it at this point. And again, I could see the history of that. When did that happen? So if I was really going to test this out, I'd probably also want to test out the other branch. Let's find another opportunity here. And we'll classify this one as existing business. And then we'll win this opportunity. And this time we should see it take that other branch. So we can go back to processes and then the process management view. And here is that second. And this time, oh good, it did what it was supposed to do and it emailed Chris.
We have a question here. What would be the best way if I wanted emails for lost opportunities as well? Should I do separate processes or add multiple start conditions?
It would depend, I would say, on whether you want to send the same email. If you're sending the same email, I would do that all in the same process. And actually, with the OR option that you have in process definitions, you wouldn't even need separate start conditions. What we could do is just go back into the start condition for this process, and we could say sales stage is equal to closed won or sales stage is equal to closed lost. Now, if you want to send different emails depending on whether it was won or lost or to different people, you'd have to put a branch in for that, and at that point it's probably just as easy to create two separate processes than to try to do it all in one. But if you're going to send the same email to the same people either way, I would just put an OR start condition in there and go about it that way.
Can processes be copied?
They can. Yeah, you can. I believe you can do that from the list view here. Or maybe it's from this view. Yeah, you can copy them. You can also actually import and export them from one Sugar instance to another, as long as they're similar or the same versions of Sugar, and as long as any like custom fields or anything that you're using would also have to match.
Is there a limit to the total number of processes?
There's not. Don't know if anyone's really done enough testing around this yet on the Sugar side, but potentially if you were running a billion processes a day, you might see some performance implications of that in terms of the actual running of the processes. But as far as I know, there's no limit to the number of process definitions that you can have.
And we have another question. You mentioned in your first slide that there will not be any workflow tool available after legacy workflow is removed. Isn't there a third-party add-on, Process Manager, available for customers who are unable to upgrade to Sugar Enterprise?
Yes, that's true. There is a third-party tool called Process Manager. So if you're on Sugar Professional and looking for a workflow tool, And that's really the only reason you would consider upgrading to enterprise. That'd be another option, would be to look at Process Manager.
Which we sell. Shameless plug, we sell that.
Any other questions at this time? Okay, feel free to keep the questions coming, I love it. But we're going to go back to the presentation. We've got one other kind of not process author related slide, and then we'll just open the floor to other questions. And that is new sugar releases. Am I doing this, Justin?
Sure.
Okay. So there were a number of releases, one for each current version of sugar. So I'm not going to try and read that list to you. I learned my lesson in our podcast episode that that's not a fun list to read. But that first row of releases there are all sugar security fixes, the same security fix for each version of sugar. Related to that, but also a little bit distinct, Sugar 7710 included that security fix, but also added support for PHP version 5.6. So it's a more recent version of PHP, which is running underneath sugar, kind of behind the scenes, doing a lot of the back-end work, as well as a number of bug fixes for version 7.7. Now you may have, when you first were notified of this sugar security release, they said initially you would not be able to upgrade to version 7.7, for example, from 7.622. That is now available again. Version 7.711 re-enabled the upgrade process. So if you're on 7.5 something or 7.6 something, you can upgrade to 7.711. The other big release that came out recently, this is maybe a couple weeks ago now, is Sugar Mobile 4.0. So this is for the Sugar Mobile app on your phone or tablet. And this introduced a new look and feel for Sugar Mobile. It's hopefully easier to read, at least that's the goal. It's a little bit more colorful. And this is also something that they're eventually planning to roll out to the Sugar web version. So, you know, kind of start getting used to it and or provide some feedback back to the Sugar product team if you absolutely hate the new look and feel, because preview is that that's probably coming to Sugar as well. The other main new feature in Sugar Mobile 4.0 is support for deep links. Basically what that means is you can open up a link from your email, for example, to a Sugar record, and it will open that directly in the Sugar mobile app, and it will open that record directly. So rather than having to navigate kind of from your link to your web browser, which is then going to redirect you to the app, it kind of just takes you more directly there and it goes to the correct record. And of course, there were some bug fixes in that release as well.
We also had a new release today of our podcast. If you want to listen to that, we recapped the Chicago Sugar Workshop a little more in depth in there. We also recapped SugarCon, as well as the just released Gartner Salesforce Automation Quadrant, where Sugar has improved once again this year.
All right, well, we are going to stay on the line for a few minutes for any other questions that you have. Feel free to keep those coming in the chat window. While we're waiting for those, I will tell you we've got 2 more upcoming user groups already scheduled on the calendar that you can sign up for. The next one is going to be Tuesday, October 18th, where we'll talk a little bit more about version 7 sidecar versus backwards compatibility and which modules are currently in each of those statuses and what the differences are that you need to be aware of with that. And then in December, we're going to take a look at the latest version of the Outlook plugin that includes a sidebar functionality and talk about how to use that. So you can sign up for those the same place you signed up for this user group today. If you only signed up for this one, feel free to sign up for those future events as well.
We have a question here. Is now a good time to move all my workflows into the new process author, or should I wait?
I would say it depends a little bit on the process or the workflow and its complexity. There are some things that currently the legacy workflow tool can do and process author still cannot. So that's one of the kind of weighting factors of why Sugar has not yet removed the legacy workflow out of the product, is because they need to resolve those differences first. And I would also say start with your simpler processes. If you're going to start doing this, then you can start with something simple and then get used to the tool and then build from there as you move additional processes over.
And then also, you know, as that earlier question addressed, those who are unable to upgrade to the Sugar Enterprise, we do, if you go on our website and you look at our software, there's one called SugarCRM, and that's the process manager that can help out those individuals. How do you use Process Author to monitor how long a record spends in each status? Is there a way to do that?
I'm not sure exactly what that question is referring to. I'm sort of thinking that might refer to the process stages, the history that we were looking at, where you have that view of how long it takes the process to go from one step to the next and where it currently is within the status. Do you know if that's what the question is about? Or if that's your question, feel free to add more detail. If I didn't quite address that, then I'd be happy to try to better understand what you're asking me about.
Yeah, they said that's fine. Is there anything you can share from the Sugar Roadmap if we miss the Sugar Workshop? Or is that pretty much, that's a Justin question.
With a lot of information there. It was a lot of, the presenter was kind of a technical person, and there was a lot of behind-the-scenes information about what technology they're shooting to use, whether that's upgrading the version of Elasticsearch or upgrading the versions of PHP, which will help with speed and adding new features down the road. So they're really working on a lot of the internals of Sugar right now. That's really what I paid attention to. I'm not sure I remember some of the other things.
Yeah, I would agree that the big focus there was kind of more on the back-end technical side, and basically my takeaway is they're doing a lot of things to make Sugar run more efficiently behind the scenes, and that is obviously good for all of us.
And they're, of course, working on removing everything out of that backwards compatibility mode and moving everything to the version 7 sidecar.
Do either of you have any best practice tips for evaluating business processes? Someone's never done it before.
I would say start by planning it out on paper.
I was going to say, write it down.
Yeah, right next to me actually on the table I have the steps for the two different options I was going to build as business processes as the demo options here. So write it down first. Think about what the triggers are and whether those are things you already have set up in Sugar. Sometimes you might need to set up a new field or a new option on a drop-down list to really trigger it the way that you want to, so make sure you've thought those things through first.
Is there a detailed class for working with the workflow module?
There is actually. Sugar University has a class on that. If you go to university.sugarcrm.com, there are, I think, a few different partners offering that class, as well as Sugar University offers it direct, I believe. I think they also on Sugar University have a few recorded webinars from when Process Author first came out. They did a two-part webinar series on Process Author and what the components are and how to work with each of the different, types of things you can drag out onto that process designer canvas.
And also, I should mention, if anyone wants to, be able to go back through this presentation and, maybe you want to walk through the steps with Megan again, this is being recorded, and we can easily send that over to you after this meeting.
I'd like to say thank you to Megan. I've watched a few of those other webinars about Process Author, and I thought this was the easiest one to digest. I think I learned something today.
Ooh, victory. Justin will stop asking me Process Author questions.
All right, we'll give you guys another minute or two in case you have any last thoughts or questions. And then we will say thank you and send you on your way.
All right, well, it looks like we're not getting any last-minute questions here. So again, thank you for your time today. Hopefully this has been useful to you. If you have any feedback about the user group series, you can always feel free to email marketing@techadv.com with that feedback, and we'd be happy to take that into consideration for future events.
Thanks so much, guys. Have a great afternoon.